Now, to talk about the various models of womanhood, and basically, this is the way the West has looked at Muslim women. How did the Muslim women react? Or the Muslim men? They were being attacked all the time. So they developed different models over the last century. There is the model that the nationalists developed, in which the woman would be, especially in the early part of the 20th century, you had Qasim Amin write a book, Liberation of Women, and he talked about it. We have to liberate women not only for themselves. He didn't think of them as being liberated. You have to liberate them so that they can be wives to the new liberated Egyptian man. And they can raise his children in a fitting manner. So it was that there was a benefit to the man in order for him to have his wife educated, lift off the veil, and become part of the public space. In the 1950s, the model that was produced by the socialists was the woman has to be a worker. And that was because the socialists wanted to have development and they wanted the women out to be working. And then you have the Islamic model. And you have several Islamic models that came along. And the first one that was brought in by the Muslim Brotherhood was that the women have to be a stay-at-home mother, no work, no voting, but educated. Okay? This was the model of the 50s. The model of the 80s, she's still at home, but there is a division of labor. The woman works at home and the man works outside. He's the one who deals with the tools, he's the one who works with the machines, he's the one who develops society, she develops the children, she creates culture. By the 90s, they became teachers, doctors, nurses, and they didn't want them to be nurses, but some of them became nurses because they felt nursing is not a fit sort of profession for women. Some of the early literature that was produced on the role of women by the traditionalists, because we have Muslim Brotherhood and we have Salafis who are more traditional, looked at women as being still more restricted. And there are some of them still today, but they're not part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Their literature talks about a woman leaves the home twice from her father's home, once when she marries and once she goes to the grave, seek their counsel and do the contrary. These are supposed to be sayings of the Prophet, but the Muslim Brotherhood has proven that they are not, but they are repeated all the time. And so there's one saying is the best circumcision is a grave and stuff like that. And what has happened is people pick on these and say this is Islam. And this is what Muslims believe. And so what has happened is that they lump Muslim Brotherhood into this Salafi, traditional, old interpretation of Islam that does exist in some pockets, and it does exist in some areas of Saudi Arabia. I took a pill because I was airsick, so I'm very thirsty. I apologize. But the Muslim Brotherhood has changed, and changed dramatically. And so let me take you through how they have changed. There was a publication by the Muslim Brotherhood by a 6-volume work by Abdul Halim Abu Shaqqa called The Liberation of Women in the Age of the Message at the time of the Prophet. 6 volumes, in which he took all these sayings that I had just read that degrade women and proved that they were out of context, that they were not what the Prophet said. And then he proceeded to explain how Muslim women should be treated according to Islam. The other document that was published by the Muslim Brotherhood was by the Jordanian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. It was the platform of the Islamic Action Front, and they advocated a lot of changes, and I'm going to come to them in a minute. And then Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who became famous recently when he returned to Cairo after the revolution and gave a lecture to 1 million people and talked about you Christians and Muslims. He gave a fatwa, which is a legal opinion, which said that women should be able to work outside, should be able to study, and Islam liberates them and does not restrict them. Now, the role of women in the plank of the Jordanian Islamic Front that I was talking about underscores that the identity of the woman is in their relationship to the family and to society as a whole. But it starts with the Quran, an affirmation that God made male and female children to whomever He wills. He has made them equal. They came out of the same cell. Now, what is interesting is that this has become sort of the preferred way of looking at gender equality in Islam. And what it says is that in the Quran, there is no concept of original sin. Now, if you look at some of the traditional interpretations of the Quran, when they talk about the story of the fall of Adam, it used to be that they would talk about, well, women are evil, they tempted Adam and he fell. And then they had some sayings, that women are crooked and if you straighten them they will break and so on and so forth. All of this is nonsense because it was never part of Islam. It was borrowed from Christian and Jewish interpretation of the Bible story. And it was appropriated and integrated into Quranic exegesis. In the Quran, it says, God created male and female from one cell. First, He created the cell and its companion. So we don't know whether He created first the male or the female. All we know is a cell and a companion. The other thing is the story of the fall. In the story of the fall, Eve does not tempt Adam. Both of them are tempted by the snake or the serpent or evil or Satan or whatever name you want to give it. And both of them sin, and both of them are punished equally. There is no temptation, there is no enticing. They are both equal. So based on that narrative, and also the verse that talks about the creation of the two from one cell, they have developed a whole history of looking at Muslim women as equal in the sight of God. That maybe society has changed their status, maybe the existing social conditions that came, maybe some of them say from Persia, but that in the Quran itself, women and men are equal. And this is what the Muslim Brotherhood is teaching. So to me, it's very interesting to see how panicked the feminists in America are about Muslim Brotherhood taking over. So this statement goes on to say, ensure that women receive all their due rights conferred to them by the Sharia. Now that's the other thing that Americans are scared about. Sharia, they're going to impose Sharia. And I don't know if you guys hear about some of the craziness going on in America. We have 2 states that have legislation to ban Sharia, Oklahoma and Tennessee. There is absolutely no reason, because nobody's trying to impose Sharia on Tennessee and Oklahoma. But basically you have legislation that went in and it was voted on and accepted, and then the court said that it was invalid. But the thing that is interesting about Sharia is, do they know what Sharia means? Because if you look at books of Sharia, you will see that the first part is called the ibadat, which is acts of worship. And the second part is mu'amalat, which is how you relate to one another. Ibadat means prayer, saying the shahada, the affirmation of faith, giving zakat, the tithe, going to the hajj, and the fasting. These are the 5 pillars of Islam. How can you ban Sharia? unless you say you cannot practice your faith. Because that is the first part of the Sharia. The other part is how you deal, the first part deals with how man relates to God. The second part is how man relates to man. The other part changes all the time. But the first part is decreed in the Quran. So when you ban Sharia, what are you banning? Nobody has thought about it, and nobody talks about it. But for Muslim women from the Muslim Brotherhood, they want to raise women's consciousness about their legal rights in such matters as work, education, choice of mate, and inheritance. And then they also, the first time I went there and I interviewed them, they weren't going to allow women to vote. In fact, there was one Muslim woman who was running for office, and they asked her husband to divorce her because she was exposing her picture in the streets. Shameless woman. The next time I went, they were running women for the office because they realized if these women run, then they would have more people that think like them in the parliament. Not only that, at first they wouldn't allow women to vote, then they decided, no, we're going to allow women to vote because that doubles our votes. So what happened is they have totally transformed their attitude towards women. They used to say that women have the right to assume some kind of office, but not the office of caliph, and therefore they can't be head of state. And I don't know how many of you have been following what's happening in Egypt, because last week the Muslim Brotherhood came out and said they will not object to a change in the constitution that says Copts or women can become the head of state in Egypt. So they're moved completely to accept what the secular women were demanding. Now, I want to look for a few minutes on what happened after 9/11 in the American community. 9/11 was very traumatic to Muslims. Basically, the first reaction was fear. You could see they were afraid that there's going to be a backlash and people were going to kill them. And especially when some Americans killed, the first person that was killed was a Copt, the second was a Sikh. And so people were afraid. And what was interesting is to see the reaction of gratitude when they noticed that there were Jews and Christians who went out and stood with them, stood guard outside mosques, outside bookstores, outside schools, to make sure that nobody attacked them. There were women who wore the scarf with them, their neighbors who offered to walk them to the store or to buy their groceries, to take them to the doctor. And I remember two of them talking to each other, why are they doing this? And the other one said, it's because their religion teaches them to be good to your neighbor. And it was a very interesting thing because at first they couldn't understand this. But what has happened as a result of that reaction is we have now Muslims who are really engaged with the American society. The first thing that happened is the men disappeared from positions of leadership. Because at first, like all minorities, most of the leadership positions are in ethnic institutions and religious institutions. So you had a lot of competition between the men who's going to be president or secretary. But what happened is, as soon as the American government passed the Patriot Act, started sort of monitoring mosques, taping sermons, listening to telephone calls, monitoring emails, the Muslim men sort of pulled back. But they needed somebody to be a spokesperson for the community. And I was interviewing some women, and one of them said, I didn't know how to speak to people. But the press came and they put a microphone and said, why do you want to kill us? What are you scheming here in the mosque? So we had to defend ourselves, and we had to speak out. And what happened is between 2001 and I'd say maybe until 2009, you have a flourishing of women's activities in the United States as spokesperson for the Muslim community. You have the head of the Islamic Society of North America was a woman. 2 different presidents of the Muslim Student Association were women. You have women beginning to go to the mosque and do study groups in order to learn how to talk about Islam, to strategize. Okay, they come and they attack us on this. What shall we say? They started studying the Quran in order to defend Islam from its sources. So what it did is it pushed people back into the mosque. It pushed the women into the mosque. They have a higher sort of status in the mosque, and they became very prominent. They were not the only people defending Islam. We had on American campuses a host of Muslim women who were professors. They had been engaged in writing about women's issues in the Middle East, in Pakistan, in various Muslim countries, and they have been doing research in order to combat these stereotypes. So that was another group. But what we have is a new form of defense of Islam, which is the feminist Muslims. And they have become probably the most controversial because neither the secular Muslims like them nor the sort of observant Muslims like them. But what they have done is they have taken theology as a means of talking to the West. And they have engaged in interpretation of the Quran, a theological interpretation of the Quran, to reach out to American Christian feminists. And there are some people within the community that feel that, there is Professor Hailem Moresi out of York. She thinks you cannot find anything nice in the Quran to say about women, so give it up. You have Margot Badran who says, no, it is something we have to do. And you have 5 women who have written full book texts on interpreting the Quran from a feminist perspective. At the same time, we have a new phenomenon that has become very prominent, and that is the native informers. And this is a group of Muslim women who go about trashing Islam. And boy, are they making money out of it. For example, Glenn Beck, when he was working for CNN, featured them. And he had all of them there. And it was at a conference in Florida, and you can still get it on YouTube and listen to them. So anybody who trashes Islam and says nasty stuff about Islam then is featured very highly. You have people like Asra Nomani, who demonizes Islam, and therefore she is able to sell her book. You know, the other people write books they don't sell because they're not sensationalizing, they don't fit into the image. So what is happening right now is that we have sort of the debate within Islam itself among the Muslim women and the Muslim men about how they can present themselves. It's part of the maturity of the community as they begin to see themselves fitting within North America and trying to see where they can find a place. When they came to the United States, America, at the end of the 19th century, you begin to have the early immigrants. America was talking about itself as, they wanted Anglo-conformity. You had to become white and Protestant and Anglo, then you could fit. But what then they had to do is prove that they were white. And we have in the United States 13 court cases in which they were trying to figure out were people from Lebanon and Syria were Christian. Are they white or not? 13 court cases. Eventually, having said that, if you think Jews are white and they are Semites, they're like us Semites, then we are white. And then they won the case. So according to the legal status, Arabs are white. Now Asians are not white. And according to the American laws, Asians can have a better deal in working with the government. They get more scholarships because they're Asian, and there is a special program for that, but not for Arabs. So now the Arabs are trying to think, maybe we should go back and say we're not white. So they're arguing among each other about what to do. I want to sort of end by talking about the debate that is taking place within Islam. The debate is whether culture is static or it can be changed. And at the same time, is religion static or it can be changed? And there are many within the Muslim community that say Islam is Islam. You know, there's one Islam. And I ask, which one? Well, it's the one they believe in. And they don't agree with somebody else. But it is my Islam, which is the true Islam. And most of them are not aware that within Islamic theology and history, many have come to say that Islam is open to change. That's why it says there will be a mujaddid, a renewer of the faith every century. God will send one. Because if Islam did not change, it would be a dead religion. It would be somewhere in, the world history is full of dead religions. The fact that it can change and adjust and integrate into the context in which it lives becomes very important. And that's what makes it a living religion. And we have one convert in the United States who has written extensively about the fact that something that Muslims can find in their own mosque, that we have different kinds of Islam. We have Arab Islam, Turkish Islam, South Asian Islam, East Asian Islam, African Islam. And why can't we have a North American Islam? And that is something that the young people have picked up, and they're trying to figure out how can we create an Islam that can fit within the context of North America. I will stop here because I realize I ran over time. I apologize.